That'll be in the
Cool.
description in the comments.
Sounds good.
All right, today for the Cavalier Book Club, we are talking Powerhouse, the story, the untold story of creative artist agency. Talking to our guy in Hollywood, Parker York Smith.
Hey, everybody.
And I'm excited to talk about it because I read this book right when it first came out, and it always stuck with me. It was one of my favorite books that I read or listened to. And so when I asked you which books you wanted to read, I put this one out there, and I'm glad you picked it.
I'm very excited about it because I had not heard of it prior to you suggesting it, and it turned out to be amazing. So I'm excited to talk about it. I had heard of Live from New York, the Saturday Night Live book, but I have not read that one yet. But this one was legit. It was great.
So James Andrew Miller also wrote the Live from New York, the history of Saturday Night Live. Also wrote the history of ESPN. So this guy's really in that world. I personally listened to it on audiobook. It's 25 hours. So if you're looking to like maximize your credit on Audible, like that's one of the books. There's a lot of business books are like 8 hours, 10 hours or under there.
Yeah.
This one's 25 and it's packed with richness. So you were just telling me how you did it, and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, I was just saying that this is one of the first books that I've ever read half of and listened to half of. I'm pretty new to the Audible experience. I've not done it much, and what I was telling you before is that it was very informative to me because I retained so much more information from actually physically reading the book as opposed to listening to it. And I think that's just kind of a me personally thing. I'm also new to, like I said, new to listening to books. So there weren't as many things that like latched into my brain with the second half of the book.
Did you do that? Did you feel like you were retaining it so you got the book, or how did that play?
No, I bought the book originally with the intention of reading it and was doing so. And then one thing led to another, and I got distracted and stopped reading as regularly as I needed to. And so to be honest, I found myself in crunch time knowing we were going to do this, and I sort of had to just binge it. Yeah. And it is genuinely so much easier to consume large amounts of content, especially for guys like us who work from home, and I can have it on. I usually don't write emails or anything while I'm listening to it, but otherwise, like if I'm just editing photos or doing things like that,
dishes, laundry, like yard work, it's the best.
All of that, exactly. When I'm taking my dogs for a walk, it's the best. So I mean, there is something to be said for the Audible thing, and I'm definitely going to keep doing it. But for something this dense and rich, as you put it, I would probably recommend getting, or at least, Kindle or whatever, if you're not a hard copy type person.
Yeah, and I've found I just like having the physical book too. I don't always read it, but half of the books I've purchased on Audible, I've ended up buying like the hard copy too to go with it. And so there is, I don't know, it's like I have vinyl records too. It's like there's something about physical media, which is a perfect segue into talking about the most important, surprising, like company you've never heard of that has touched every single aspect of entertainment that you didn't even realize. And that's what you really learn in this book. So Creative Artist Agency is 40 years old. There's 700 agents, and they've been involved in nearly every movie, actor, television show. They're getting into technology now, and they've basically this underlying, they are the roots of the tree that you never knew have touched so many parts of your life. And what I really like about the book is I'm always fascinated with like biographies and histories, and I love to learn about stuff that's happened. But this book gives you that. They give you a micro biography of old time Hollywood, because they even say like you need the basis of understanding the Hollywood system pre 1970s. But then they even go up into, they're talking about the Harvey, what was the Miss America pageant, the host?
Steve Harvey.
Steve Harvey, when he messes up the thing, it goes up into very real time today. And that's my favorite part of some of these business books that are narrative nonfiction, is not only do you get the story, but you get to understand the behind the scenes machinations of the decisions they made, so that you can kind of learn from that, but then you're also entertained because you've got these characters like Mike Ovitz and Ron Meyer, and they're going back and forth. And so that's one of the things I really like about this book in particular, is that you get the history, you get the richness, you learn some stuff from it, but it's super entertaining at the same time.
See, that's very interesting to me to hear you say that, because as someone who's lived in Hollywood for the last just about 10 years, I was already extremely familiar with CAA, as at least as a concept. So it's fun to me to hear about other parts of the country or the world who may not necessarily have had that exposure to it, because here in town, it's CAA and it's WME, and those are the main players. Those are where that all of the biggest and best talent from every aspect of entertainment, whether it's movie, music, sports, everything, they are all repped by one of those two agencies. So to learn the story about this from day one of the agency was really, really interesting. I actually found the early days up into like the mid 90s, I found that to be a lot more interesting personally than the sort of 95, like kind of right when Ovitz leaves, to today was much less stimulating for me. Although there was a lot of really interesting just information. I was so surprised with how open they were about how they went about their deals and the specifics of what they were able to achieve, as opposed to being a little bit more guarded with that stuff, which is what I would have expected from a representative.
Yeah, and I think they're the stories that are told that you wouldn't get if there weren't like 10 to 20 years of history, like separating the past. Like they're telling stories from the 80s and 90s, so they'll tell you like all this stuff. And that's why I think it is so rich for they call it the 1.0 era. That's why it's so good. And like today, it's like they kind of talk about the moves, but you don't get as much of the stories.
Right.
So you have that kind of separation from there. But I also like, and they say this right in the beginning, is like it's a narrative. So there's all these, it's basically just quotes from all these people. And you get this Rashomon effect where you hear Mike Ovitz's version of the story, you hear the agent's version of the story, and then you hear, like in that case, it was, I don't know why I always blank on names, the Back of the Future director's version of the story.
Yeah.
Why am I blanking on his name?
Zemeckis, was it?
Yeah. So you basically get all three versions, and you have to kind of figure out, like, okay, what was the real thing that happened?
Right.
You know what the outcome was, but like Ovitz is like, you don't even fucking know this guy. But then he's like, I was the reason the deal happened. So I love that kind of stuff, and it happens a few times.
I'm such a fan of old Hollywood, just in general, but especially those interweavings of the business side of things, and how it really was just such a handshake industry, and these multi-million-dollar deals of just like, oh, I've got a guy, we've got a guy, let's make it happen. Okay, cool. And then it's done. Like it just is. And honestly, I think it actually still functions heavily in that way, even to this day. But it was really, really fascinating to be able to hear that. And I did enjoy sort of hearing all the different aspects, and the Miller, the author, did a really excellent job of kind of pitting them against one another in the writing style, and like, here's what he said, and then here's what he said, back to back, one after one another. And it was sort of like, well, I don't really know who to believe. And so it was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. And I mean, they sort of almost deified Michael Ovitz for a good portion of the book. He was like superhuman. It was incredible. I couldn't even believe it. I was like impressed, but then also sort of, I don't know, something. Tell me what your thoughts on him as a person. How did that make you feel? Or what
my exposure to him, and so it's not really a prequel or a sequel to the book necessarily, but the first time I came across Ovitz was in the book Disney War, which if you enjoyed this book, you will love Disney War, because it gets into the deep history of Disney in the 90s and how they started to fight between control of the company at that point, which was Michael Eisner, and it very heavily focuses on Ovitz. And the good thing about that book is that it's largely written with court documents, because they sued each other, and so all the stuff came out in the lawsuits, and so you get kind of Eisner's story, you also get Ovitz that came in there, so there's a lot of details in that book about his failure to really like make things happen at Disney. But it is true. It's like he comes out, and what was this stat? There was like 200 to 300 calls every day coming through his office, and he had 4 secretaries. One was just for gifts. And it's like, I believe that stuff was going on, but he really was just like this machine. And that's what one of the higher, so that was, I think we talked about the overall review. Some of the high level things that I took away from was they really were this pivotal point in the industry, which made them successful. So as much as skill was involved, it was also luck of timing. And he mentioned that in the beginning, is that they were going from a time when it was story driven movies into star and director era, and so the timing was right for them to leave William Morris and really succeed. And they basically had the foresight to lock up that style of filmmaking, and they pushed 80s and 90s. They were involved in, like, it's too hard to name all the actors. They interview in the book too. They've got Tom Cruise, they've got Tom Hanks, they have like Bill Murray and the Ghostbusters and Ramis and like just everybody in that era. And they were also responsible for like the Coca-Cola polar bears, which is like, I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, are you serious? Like, there's too much stuff they're involved in, which makes sense though, because they were huge. I mean, they were hundreds of people, and they were all within the heart of Hollywood. They are the people making things happen.
Absolutely, yeah. They had their hands in so many different things, and it was really fascinating to sort of get a closer look at how they were thinking about it. For me, one of the big sort of themes was just this idea of teamwork, where they all were, although Ovitz kind of spearheaded everything and ended up kind of fracturing a lot of the core values that they sort of instilled in the company from when they created it. It was so fascinating to hear how much they recognized from day one, like, okay, Ovitz, you're the idea execution guy. Ronnie Meyer, you're the like the heart of the company. You're the one that the talent's going to love. You're going to deal with them. Because there's a couple stories that I absolutely love that I want to talk about for sure, involving Ron Meyer. And then the other founders, like, they each had such a clear idea of what they could bring. And I guess it is kind of luck, like you said, to be able to find a group of 4 guys who are able to sort of put ego aside for so long to recognize their own strengths and their own weaknesses, to work together and create this absolute behemoth in an industry that's not, you can't just go, like, again, in the 70s it was different, but you can't just walk into Hollywood and be like, okay, we're going to change everything. We decided this is what we want to do, so that's what's going to happen. Like, that's crazy. Like, it was so cool. Like, as someone who moved to LA and had, very minimal success pursuing the industry of acting, like, it is incredible to hear these stories of the origin, and just, I absolutely loved it. Like, can we jump into like a couple stories from the book that we really enjoyed?
Yeah, I actually had importance of teamwork as one of my high level themes too, because so the author even says, like, the success of the agency was the clash in the intertwining of personalities, like you're saying, but also the way that they took what they learned at William Morris and set up the entire agency to work together, where it's like, the client was represented by CAA, and they had like a main point of contact. But if somebody from the TV department or someone from the digital department, like, they set the entire structure up to be very collaborative and have, this ultimate success was for the company and for the talent, and then the agents would reap the benefits of that. And then I also had to, for them to go into the way that they diversified, like, they didn't focus on movies. That was like the tentpole thing, but they had TV, which was driving in revenues. And then later on, that's some of the stuff that I was interested in the later parts of the book, where like they're starting to get into more investment banking, and they're starting to get more into technology, and they're starting to like go into that different stuff. And it shows that if you are forward thinking enough and you can kind of disrupt yourself and make sure that you're thinking ahead on where the industry is going, that's what ultimately keeps them around for 40 years instead of, William Morris is still around, but they've been through several iterations, and it was cool to see the clashing of those two.
Most definitely. Yeah. I don't mean to disparage the end of the book or the second half of the book by any means. I did genuinely enjoy it, especially the sports stuff, and just kind of like they were talking specifically about JJ Watt and how coming into a meeting, they say, what are you interested in? How willing are you to work outside of your sport? Because having a career outside of that is a lot of work, just like it is to be a professional athlete. And what can we do to make those things happen, whether it's placing them in movies, getting them products, getting them to be spokespeople, like all of those different things, and having that incredible ability to just know everyone and cultivate so many meaningful relationships that you can basically go into your Rolodex and have someone to call for anything and everything, thanks to the fact that they were so collaborative, like you said, as opposed to the early days of William Morris being very territorial, being very interested in self-gain as opposed to company-wide prosperity, I suppose.
Yeah, and J.J. Watt, living in Maine, that's one of his things. Like,
yeah,
he's a huge spokesperson for them. And I'm not as familiar with sports. I was talking to a friend. I was like, "Is J.J. Watt any good?" And he's like, "He's good, but he hasn't played much." And like, from me being on the outside, I would think that he's the greatest football player ever because I see him everywhere, and he's very philanthropic, and he's put himself out there. But apparently, he doesn't play much, and so it's like
he's been dealing with a lot of injuries for the last few years. But yeah, I mean, again, that's just a testament to the power of their abilities. Is he is one of the most relevant people in sports, and I mean, he is extremely talented. Like, he's very good at what he does when he's healthy. So I mean, you have to kind of have that basis first. But anyway, it was very, very cool to think about these people who, in my head, prior to reading this, I would have revered on this level of, Hollywood royalty, but in the end, they are completely understanding of the fact that they just need to be working with the right people. They have to, go shake the right hands and be willing to put in the work, as opposed to just kind of like setting up what works in terms of the movies and the TV and sitting back and collecting their check. Being understanding of the ability to diversify and create all kinds of new opportunities for yourselves is very fascinating, because that's something I'm interested in our world, being able to recognize new opportunities or new places that you can try something and be innovative. Like, it's not something you can just decide to do. You have to be really dedicated to it.
I have one more takeaway, and then we'll talk about I have a couple of like cool things that I pulled out, some of my favorite stories. But the other one was, cool. It was one of the things where it was a story, but it was also like a learning. And it was when, I think it was Mike Ovitz was asking for autonomy in this new role as a CEO. And the guy that was telling the story was basically like, you never ask for autonomy. It's like, you earn autonomy. You never ask for that shit. And I'll never forget when I was working at Apple, he was I don't know, like 3 or 4 rungs from the CEO running retail. Everybody in the store wanted like promotions, and he was like, you don't ask for a promotion. Like, you do the work, and then you ask, like, I've been doing this role, look how good I've been doing at it, and then you earn it. And it's like, that was a big crystallizing point for me, like professionally. It was like, you don't come and say like, I can do this, can't do this, can't do this. It's like, you prove it, and then you earn it, basically. And it's like, for you, all the photography you've done, you could have walked around Hollywood saying, I can take all the photography, but now you have an entire Instagram page and a great following to say like, look, I can create this type of content. And I think that's really important.
Totally. Completely agree. That's a great example. Yeah.
And then
let's tell a couple of the fun Hollywood stories. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
It was the Ovitz one, but it was right around, it was at the peak of his power. And it was a story about how somebody had wronged Ovitz, and he was like, all right, look, watch your mirrors, check your brakes, like, watch out for everything. And he was like, is Ovitz crazy? And he's like a fox. And it was like, that was the aura that Ovitz had at this time, which is just like unreal.
Later on in the book, when they talk about, there were people going from CAA to a BMW pitch meeting.
I have that one, yeah.
Yes, and they all drove Mercedes to the pitch meeting, and the William Morris people went after the CAA people to pitch, saw them in all the Mercedes, and just couldn't believe it. And they said that was never something that would have happened under Mike Ovitz because he would have been aware. It's just like that kind of thing, that ability to kind of be an ass kisser to a certain extent, but at the same time also be able to then reap all of the power and all of the incredible ability to just get things done because of the fact that you are so willing to like kiss ass. I can't really think of anything better to a better way to phrase it, really. So like that was really cool. Another Ovitz story that I really loved was they very briefly talked about for years and years, he would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day. He was very Eastern. He had an Eastern philosophical mind. He was very into, Zen and being very mindful and things like this. So he would work out with the same person every day for years and was like, you know what, this guy is a character. Like, I got to get him in front of somebody, because he was constantly interested in making money, making opportunities happen. And he's like, yeah, I brought him into some executives and they ended up liking him for a part. And what do you know? It was Steven Seagal. Like, so crazy. Like, that kind of thing is nuts, dude. The fact that someone could just shepherd you into this massive career. And again, Steven Seagal had to make the right moves and had to show up. But that is absolutely crazy to be able to just create something as memorable and as interesting as Steven Seagal's career has been. In certain circles, he's like an icon. Yeah. That's just such a testament to just a crazy Hollywood story. I don't know. I just thought that was so cool.
I also liked, it was also towards the peak of Ovitz power. He was like pursuing an NFL team. He wanted an NFL team in Los Angeles, which at the time, he even says in the book, it's like it's a little bit ahead of its time. But if he would have gotten that team for $500 million at the time, it would be worth like $2.5 billion today. But there's also, it's like, I always think about Gary Vee. Gary Vee like wants to buy the Jets, and like that's his big thing. But he's like late to the game. It's like he's way past it. It's like teams are very valued. Like Mike Ovitz was like, let's build a stadium and a team. Like he just couldn't make it happen at that time. And that seemed to be one of the first things that really made him like slip and lose grasp. It was like that. And then Ron Meyer left, and then he went and tried to do his own agency, and like that seems to be like peak Ovitz right there. And then he also tried to take over, what was it, Seagram's, and then like there's all these like different things he almost left for. But that was like the last time where he was like, all right, I'm going to pull this all together, and it didn't happen. Yeah.
Another interesting thing with him that I found sort of comforting or interesting is that after he had left and been gone for a little while, he was being given all these opportunities as a CEO, and it was starting to become so clear that he wasn't necessarily a great business person.
Yes.
He was a great agent, and it's a very different thing because he didn't necessarily understand a lot of the terminology or a lot of the common practices. And
I need my own treasury department.
Yes, exactly. That's the example. And
you don't get that.
Right. That's not a thing, Mike. Sorry. Like, that to me was just like, oh, okay. So, because to me, I idolize all these people who are, moguls, who have their hands in so many different things. But then when you step back, you start to realize like, oh, you can't have too much of an ego about it, because it really is just these people sort of being the figurehead of a whole bunch of other people on their team who are handling the treasury department or the different things like that just because Jay-Z or Justin Timberlake or whoever owns 10 brands or has their hands in all these different things doesn't mean they're there in the trenches making all of the little decisions and handling everything. So like, just being good at what you're good at and really just driving so hard with that, I think is extremely valuable. And it's easy to get, at least for me personally, it's easy to get distracted from that, because I feel like, okay, I've got that in my toolkit now. Now I can go work on a new thing, as opposed to just continuing to drive hard at the thing that I know that I'm good at and that I know separates me from other people. So that was kind of like specific thing that really hit home for me.
When they really get into that in the Disney War book, is they kind of touch on it in this book where it's like he didn't grasp corporate finance, but in the Disney War book, they give specific examples where like he was gifting tens of thousands of dollars worth of art to clients, and it's like you can do that in the agency world, but as a public company you can't do that. And it's like he was getting in trouble for that sort of stuff. But then also, because he had such a reputation in the industry, all of the VPs at Disney were like, I'm not reporting to him. Like he had huge personality clashes going into there, and I think it's his wife even says like we were screwed from day one. Like he came home and was like, this is not it. But then it also talks about the machinations of where like Eisner was basically like, you are not going to be president, but he came in with the expectation to be president, and they go through that sort of stuff. And so I did that book for the book club months ago, so close followers will remember that. But cool. I also loved
check it out.
The John Hughes story. So like they're talking about John Hughes, and
Yes.
he's like on this ranch, and he's prolific like screenwriter, Home Alone, and like all the 80s movies that you love. And he's like, all right, I got all these scripts, and he goes, I got this script about a baby that gets an abortion, but he grows up, and the agents were like, no, like that's a bad idea. And he goes, I'm so glad you're honest. I told somebody else, and they were like going to develop it. And it was like, that goes back to some of the stuff about honesty is it's like if you kiss this guy's ass too much, they'll see through it. And I love that example because nobody's going to pull one over on John Hughes. Plus, I also like the stories like tied into that. They talked about 101 Dalmatians, and I remember watching that movie as a kid like over and over and over, and they're like, he made $1 bazillion off that movie because he had like the rights to it. And it's like, as a kid, you never think that kind of stuff. But then to know about that, or like how much money they made off of Ghostbusters, and they called it like a cash grab, basically the numbers 2-1. And it's like that sort of stuff is so fascinating. And to actually have, that's what I liked. I did the book on Robin Williams that just came out. And in that book, they had specific like salary numbers for the movies, and you rarely ever get that. And that's what I like about this book too, is they're like, you know, it was this many points on this movie, and it was this sort of commission, and it's like that's the stuff that's usually shrouded in mystery, but now they're able to expose it through, I guess, time passing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was touching on earlier, was their willingness to share those kinds of things that I'm so unaccustomed to them being willing to do. But like you said, it's almost like a statute of limitations. Like after a while, you just get more comfortable sharing that stuff because it's not going to really affect anyone. Whereas they're not going to go tell you all of their clients' specifics right now. You know, like that would probably be bad business.
There's a degree of bragging to it too. It's like, yeah, I made $15 million that year. I don't care.
Right. Exactly. I know. God, they were just making so much crazy money.
Yeah.
One more story that I loved was right when Ron Meyer was courting Sylvester Stallone to join him as a client, and they were kind of buddies. Ron Meyer was excellent at cultivating relationships. He was very, very heartfelt, very, very kind. No one had anything but absolute shining words to say about him.
Oh, they basically had obituaries for him when he left. I like that part a lot too. It was like he was on the phone crying, and like Sylvester Stallone's crying. Like,
yeah, I know. God, those two. Well, something with those two. They obviously have a special relationship. But so when Ron Meyer is courting Sly to be his new client, it was like right after Rocky, right after, you know, right at the peak of Sly's fame, really, or maybe it was after Rambo. I can't remember. But anyway, he was like, Sylvester, I've got this movie for you. You've got to do it. I'm not even your agent yet. I just want to give you this movie so that I won't even take a commission. Take this as good faith, and then come sign with me. Like, we'll do great things. It's a comedy. I know you've not done comedy, but it's going to be a good move for you. Sylvester's like, I don't really want to do it. He ends up not doing it, but he ends up signing with Ron Meyer. Anyway, the movie was Beverly Hills Cop, and it was like the highest grossing comedy in the I think it was the highest grossing comedy of all time until The Hangover. Or maybe R-rated, or I don't know the specifics, but it was like this massive property that he served, that he could have made hundreds of millions of dollars on inevitably, and he passed it up, which to me, I'm just like, there are so many stories like that in Hollywood history that are just so great and so juicy. but it ends up being okay because they've got another thing, or something else happens. There's always something coming down the pipeline. So
I even like with Sly towards the end, they're kind of like talking about how good it is to have an agent, and he specifically quoted, he's like, my agent was begging me to make Creed. He was like, I didn't want to do it, but he like was pushing it for it, and then it ended up happening. And it's like that's toward the end got a little bit like gushy around the idea of agents. Like it started to talk about how like they're pretty good, and then like all this infighting, and then at the end they're kind of like, that's like Evil Longoria is like, I use CAA to its max, and they've got this department and that department, and I'm developing and all this stuff. And it's like towards the end they're kind of like, this is why they're really good. But I don't think the author has any reason to want to do that. I don't think he's even represented by anybody related to CAA, which is kind of funny.
I don't know who he mentioned who his agent was in the acknowledgments, but I don't remember. I didn't end up like checking where he's repped by, but hopefully not CAA. That would seem weird. So, I bet it's not.
So does your wife run into like, is she like seeing, did she, or I guess how interested in the book was she being inside of the system?
Well, she, I mean, I would tell her different stories and things. I definitely have a lot more of a sentimental relationship to Hollywood. I love the old stories and things like that. Working in Beverly Hills, she works for Tiffany's in Beverly Hills at their big store there. So she's always, fielding calls from people's agents, or, a lot of the big agents or talent themselves. It ends up being a lot of like agents' assistants calling for the talent. Mm-hmm. So she kind of deals with all kinds of different stuff with it, but she's not really that interested. She's very much not interested in the world of acting in Hollywood and things like that. She does not find it stimulating at all.
Romantic. Like, she doesn't have 4 books on Hollywood's machinations in business.
Definitely not. So, I mean, it was fun to be able to tell those stories because, like, she gets a kick out of it just because I get a kick out of it. But at the same time, like, she was not, she would not be sitting down to read this book. That's for sure.
So there's a big thing you took away. You had mentioned that it really like stuck with you that Ovitz couldn't like expand too much and really focus on that. Is that like your big thing come out of it?
I would say probably just in sort of looking back at it, that was the main thing that, because, I'm someone who's self-conscious. I'm always dealing with things like, am I doing the right thing? Am I working the right ways? I'm always questioning myself. So having the ability to see someone who could be just absolutely killing it in every sense of the word, but still not almost be blinded by their success is like really reaffirming to me, to just be like, trust in help, trust in assistance, and the fact that you have good people around you, and don't be afraid to ask when you don't know what something is. Like, that's a big thing that I am always trying to be aware of, is like, if I don't know the answer to something, or if I don't know what something is that someone's talking about, not just trying to pretend like I do so that they think I'm smart. Being able to be like, I don't know what that is. Can you please explain it? And most of the time, people are more than willing to do so. So yeah, for the sake of making this a therapy session, that was probably the thing that I took away most. And just anything is possible. Like, as cliche as that sounds, like, whatever was different then that makes me feel like that could never happen nowadays, like, there's something that will be different now than it is in 40 years. Our industry, for one, like,
we're in the shift right now. We're in it. It's so cool.
So being able to sort of be at the precipice of all that and really be able to look around and just appreciate it is really fun.
Yeah. And with Ovitz too, what was the quote towards the end of the book when the partner's talking? He was like, we found out Ovitz had a fucking jet. And he was like, who cares if I have a jet? Right. He was like, I don't care.
We couldn't tell people we had a jet. Everyone's going to want to borrow it. It's like, that actually makes a lot of sense, but it's still kind of a dick move not to tell people.
For me, it was really about, and it's related to Ovitz too. It's about self-awareness. And for him, it was like, he was very powerful, and he could I love the things where he was like, all right, call me back. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. And then like he'd call back and the problem was solved. But like he was so unaware of how he was perceived by others that it hindered him, especially later in life, because like the Disney people didn't want to work with him because he had this reputation. And it's like he admired Ron Meyer for how good he was with people, but he didn't really take the time to maybe cultivate that part of his personality and to try and change that and sort of thing. And so I really liked, and I can't remember what I took away from the first time. It was something very similar, but it's like just be self-aware around who you are, how you are received by the world, and it always like I'd much rather be Ron Meyer than I would be Mike Ovitz. It's like if I had to pick between the two, I would way rather have deep, meaningful relationships rather than this unwieldy power that is just based on a lot of fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just sort of further drove home the concept that's becoming more and more relevant, at least in my world, is like major CEOs, major, these people who are making a major stamp on their industries, on the world at large, like they oftentimes are like borderline sociopaths. Like they just aren't all there emotionally, and it ends up working to their benefit in terms of monetary and professional gain. But at the end of the day, like you've got to recognize that that's not all, that stuff's important to a certain extent. You've got to make a living, but like really recognizing that exactly what you said, I would hope that everyone would much rather be Ron Meyer than
I think there's a lot of
Mike
people
Ovitz.
that want to be Mike Ovitz. That's
I know,
the scary thing.
I know. And sometimes I do too. And I have to really like stop myself and recognize that thankfully that's not really in my DNA to be that way. I'm far too self-aware.
Yeah. And the teamwork thing. It's like they were successful. They had people around them. They pushed each other. They were collaborative and they were complementary. And so that's a big one too.
Yeah. And again, when it came down to it, Ovitz sort of came back to Meyer and
screwed him on a house.
Apologized. Well, he screwed him, bought the land, sold him the land, which was, I guess, nice. But, the ultimate capitalist
Mike,
move.
he just can't help himself.
I know. I held off from Googling him while I was reading because I didn't want to spoil anything because I still haven't done it. I need to like see what he.
If you see pictures of him in the 90s, you're gonna be so disappointed.
Even in the middle of the book, there's I'll just show you here. There's like a picture section.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool, but there's a photo.
See, I don't get that. I don't get my audiobook. Some of the audiobooks have like a PDF download where you get some of that kind of stuff, but that one I don't think so.
Well, there's a photo of when when they formed in 1975 of like the founders and a couple of the other big main agents. And looking at Ovitz, I'm like, that guy?
Yeah.
He's the most powerful man in Hollywood. He looks like a Midwestern dad from the 70s.
He is.
He doesn't look like intimidating at all, but obviously he was.
Yeah. I think what I'm going to do as a follow-up to this book, this is called The Big Picture. This is a book, it basically picks up kind of where this book leaves off. It's covering the shift to digital media, but what's fascinating about this book is the author wrote it based on like stuff that's going on in Hollywood, but then also he wrote this based on all of the private emails that were leaked by Sony. And so he went through and just like got every email that was never supposed to see the light of day. And he constructed the narrative around the shift to like Netflix, Amazon, YouTube going on in Hollywood, contrasted with all of the stuff going on at Sony at the time and how superhero movies have become very dominant. And so this feels like the follow-up to CAA. So this is one where it's not even on Audible, so I might have to sit down and read it. I have a lot of trouble sitting down and reading it and things, but I appreciate you coming on to talk about Powerhouse, and I'm glad you got some stuff out of it.
I'm super excited. It was fun. I highly recommend it to anyone. It's a big old book. Like, it's not something that will be easily digested in a weekend unless you've got nothing to do. But regardless, it's fun and the way that it's structured, like you said, it's just little conversational points.
It's like tweets. It's like reading. Yeah. It's like thousands of tweets.
Yeah, it really is. It's a good bathroom book. It's an easy one to just sort of pick up and read a few pages at a time. And as you get further along into it, you're going to start to find that you're making more and more time to read it because it just grabs you so hard.
So do you have any books that you think of, like any sort of like, because what I try to cover on the book club is like self-development, business type of stuff. What are some of your favorites that people might check out?
I just recently finished the Power of Habit, which is a super popular one that I feel like it's borderline almost cliche. It's become so popular now, but for me, I really enjoyed it just because I am such a habitual person. So understanding why I am that way, and also a little bit of how you can sort of start to break those and form more positive habits is hugely beneficial, both professionally, emotionally, in your relationships, everything. So that was one that I really enjoyed. Otherwise, I've been actually doing a lot of novels lately. I sort of get a little burnt out on business self-help. I'll go like 6 months on, 6 months off, because it gets a little daunting to always be constantly digesting those. Yeah. I've also started doing, are you familiar with Blinkist?
Oh yeah, like the quick summaries of the books.
Yes, so it's like Cliff's Notes, but for all, like, not just self-help and business, but psychology, all kinds of different things. So that's really fun when there's one that I'm like intrigued by, but I'm not necessarily willing to sit down and digest the entire
Give
thing.
It all 8 to 9 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no.
All right. Well, cool, man. This was fun. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So everybody check out Parker's channel, YouTube, Instagram. Particularly, I really liked your when you had it was the Black Tux party, but you had the tuxedo on, you and your wife. Fantastic picture. And so if you want to see the whole Parker package, check that out.
Yeah, totally. More videos coming soon. Just trying to get on your guys' level with all that, trying to still figure it all out. It's a lot of work.
From the times I've talked to Aaron Marino, he is too. So we're all in good company.
Exactly right. I know. It's never ending, but that's okay.
Cool.
All right, man.
That's the book club for this month, and I'll send out emails about I'll send out emails about January because I'm not going to do this one yet, but I'll send that out. So check your inboxes.